Hello, welcome to my channel, and this is the final review for the reMarkable Move, the 7.3-inch e-ink color note-taking device that just got released a little over a week and a half ago. So this review series is basically going to culminate all my work around testing the device, putting it through its paces, both in the lab as well as in the field, and then giving my overall impressions. This particular video is geared toward reMarkable users. I'm making a separate review video for non-reMarkable users, and it's simply because the messaging and the things the two groups care about is different, so it made sense to create different videos. My ultimate conclusion of the move won't change between each video, so I'm going to give basically the same conclusion. I'm just tailoring that message to different groups, and that's why there's two different reviews. Certainly feel free if you're interested in checking out the other review, but everything you need will be included in this one, so it's certainly not necessary to get the full sense of what I feel about the device. That's all captured here. All right, having said that, let's go ahead and start with the battery test results, and let's see what we found with my tests. So let's start talking about the battery test results for the reMarkable Move. Now, a question people always ask as it relates to these e-ink devices is how good is the battery life? Unfortunately, the answer is it depends. It depends on how you use it, what particular aspects of the device you use, etc. So I created this table, and there's kind of two ways that you can utilize the table. So the first way is that, let's say that you, as an example, bought an e-ink device and said, I'm going to spend most of my time reading on the device using a little bit of front lighting. So what you would then do is go to those columns that are relative to that, add the numbers together, and that would give you your battery drain per hour. So that gives you a general sense of how many hours you can get out of a device. But that's a little bit more geeky than most people want to get into. So there's another way you can approach this table, and simply saying, how does this device perform compared to other devices that are at least in a similar category? And in that spirit, I've included all the devices that range from 7 to 8.2 inches. These are all the devices that I've done tests on for that size class. However, at the bottom, where there's an average and the median, I include all the tests I've ever done, and that includes 10-inch devices and even larger. So you can compare the Move versus either similar devices or the overall average of all the tests that I've done, which almost number about 30 devices at this point. Now, one thing to note before we start focusing on the specific numbers is that in order to do an apples-to-apples comparison, I turn off any type of power-saving features on all the devices I test. And usually that involves either an automatic standby mode or an automatic shut-off mode, both designed to help preserve battery. By shutting those off, I can kind of compare and isolate different aspects of the device and get a better comparison between devices. However, in doing so, you kind of end up creating a worst-case scenario. So just know that actual usage of a device will probably involve using some of these power-saving features, and so the numbers that you'll experience will be better than what the tables might suggest. So just one thing to understand. All right, so let's go ahead and start going through the results, and then at the end of it, I'm going to go ahead and summarize these results and kind of give an analysis of what they all mean. But we're going to start off with how the device performed in standby mode with the screen off. So this is a state where you just press the button and in a couple seconds it's ready to start being engaged with, writing or reading or what have you. And for the Move, that rate was a 0.12%, which is right there at both the average and the median. So it's right there with most devices that I've tested. Next up is standby with the screen on. So this is similar, but the screen is on. You don't have to press any buttons. You just pick up your stylus and you can start interacting with the device at any time without that 1 or 2 second delay. And in this particular case, I measured a 1.5% battery drain per hour, which is better than the average, but not quite as good as the median. Finally, there's Wi-Fi. So it's basically standby with the screen on, but also with Wi-Fi on at the same time. And in this test, Wi-Fi is not directly downloading at the time. It's really just having it on in the background. So I'm trying to measure here, how much of a penalty do you have in leaving Wi-Fi on as opposed to trying to shut it down to save battery. And in this case, the rate is 1.6%, which is barely any higher than the 1.5% we saw with the standby with the screen on. So this implies that it doesn't really help to turn off Wi-Fi. You might as well just go ahead and leave it on. And as we can see, it does better than the average and is right there at the median of other devices. Now our attention is going to focus on front lighting. And this is a little bit of a weird one. Now historically, I've looked at cold lighting, either full or half, and then made those measurements. The difficulty, though, is as more and more devices comes out, the intensity of the light can vary from device to device. And indeed, with the Move, it's a little more muted than it is with other devices. So it's a little bit strange making this comparison, but I went ahead and did it anyway. And if I take the reMarkable Pro Move, I turn on the setting, which allows the brightest light possible, which is available in the options, and I put it at the highest level, then that battery drain is 6.7% per hour, better than the average, not quite as good as the median. But again, keep in mind it's a little bit dimmer than what some of these other devices provide. Then for front lighting with half cold, I actually kept that at the top level, but I disabled that ability for the light to be bright. So I'm still, 5 bars on the light gauge, if you can envision that from the drop-down bar, but taking off that brightness setting option. And that ended up at 2%, which is better than both the average and the median. So while this isn't the best comparison because of that variation in brightness between devices, these are still generally good numbers, and the Move is pretty comparable, if not maybe a little bit better, than most devices as it results to front lighting. The last category that I'm going to measure is continuous note-taking. Now, the reason why I didn't do a reading test is I always do it based on Kobo if that's available, and if it's not, then I default then to the Kindle. And reading off of an app like that is a much different experience than reading, say, an EPUB in the native reader that's available on the Move. And so there really wasn't any point in trying to do a reading test that was apples and oranges versus the other devices I measured. So there's no result there. But I can certainly do a continuous note-taking test, and I did, and the result of that was a blistering, in a bad way, 25.9%. This means that using this type of activity, I could expect 4 hours of life on the device, which is the second worst result that I've ever measured. And you can see the worst result there belonging to the Big Me Galley. Now, to be clear, what this test is basically for 10 minutes straight, I write furiously with absolutely no breaks. And then once we hit the 10-minute mark, I check every 30 seconds until the battery counter changes so I have a more precise measurement. So it's a very intensive writing test. And it's more analogous to, say, writing in verbatim notes, say in a classroom, for example, than it is to most of the type of note-taking that you might do with any of these devices. But it is a level-setting test that is measured evenly across devices. And so the Move does legitimately have a pretty bad result, even though that type of writing is not something you're likely to do on a device like this. Okay, so having gone over those battery results, what are my conclusions? And in particular, should you be concerned particularly with that last result around continuous note-taking? I mean, if we take that out for a second, the overall results are fine. The Move kind of performed more or less above or below the average and the median of other devices. And e-ink devices as a class have better battery life than other electronic devices. So for the Move to be there kind of average with others is actually generally a positive thing. But let's focus on the continuous note-taking. I think that may or may not be a concern depending on how you were thinking of using the device. Now, in my opinion, or the way that I'm using the device, as brief notes, checklists, that type of thing, it's less of a concern because I'm not doing continuous note-taking for the most part on this device. I might be using a different device for that type of thing, if I'm doing it at all. But this is, I think, a concern for people that maybe were looking for the Move to be their one device. This is another argument against that. The first argument would be the form factor, the size of the screen. But I think the battery life on continuous note-taking is that second argument, because it's just not going to have great battery life under that type of activity. So I think that's what that result ultimately means for folks. I wouldn't dissuade people based on the battery life, again, unless you were using this as your sole note taker. Now, another way to think of battery life is around the manufacturer's claim that you can get 2 weeks of battery life between charges using the device. And I find that to be a little bit optimistic based on my own testing, but I wouldn't call it an egregious claim. When I tested this in the field, and I'll explain kind of how I used it in a second, I was getting roughly 10% or a little bit more of battery drain every day. And so for me, it was more like 9 days of battery life between charges, not 14. But battery life really does depend on how you use the device, and it is possible that some people would be able to use the device in such a way that they can kind of get it to stretch out longer. I'll just say in my particular case, what I did was I would put it in kind of a standby mode overnight, open it up in the morning, say at 8 a.m. in the morning until 5 p.m. that night when I put it back into standby mode. And during the course of the day, I would be doing things like listing out my agenda for the day, my calendar, plus the things I want to accomplish, highlighting when I've accomplished those things, taking it with me as I leave the office where I'm taking just little notes. Someone may say, hey, can you get me this thing? And I can write that down and then get back to the office and then take care of it. Those are the type of note-taking I was doing on this device, and I used it in conjunction with a larger e-ink device that I would take notes in for meetings and what have you. So I used my Move as a supplement to a 10-inch device, and that was the type of battery drain that resulted. So I would say that the battery drain overall, having said all of this about the specific results, about my personal experience, is fine. I don't think the battery is a particularly strong point for the Move, but I don't think it's a weakness either. Again, unless you're hoping to use this as a sole device and you're a heavy note taker. In those cases, this would give reason for pause. Before we move on, a couple quick notes about how I ended up using the device in the field. And I kind of described it just a few seconds ago. But also, I just wanted to note that I didn't use any front lighting. And I did turn on the standby mode in order to save battery during the course of the day. So those are important things to understand. But in addition to that, I did run across a pretty unique thing. So here's the device, and I have it here in standby mode, and that's something you select in the options. And you can see here's this dark bar on top, and that's how you know it's in that mode. And what it allows you to do, if you select this again in the settings, is you can still see what your last page was when it went into this mode. So it's a nice way of being able to see a list even though you're in a position where you're saving battery. The piece I didn't know is that in order to activate this device coming out of that, I could press the power button to do that, but I could also just simply remove the stylus and the device will return into an active state. Pretty cool. Now let's go ahead and look now into the pros and cons of the device and go really into the detail of what I think of the reMarkable Move. So we're going to start off with the primary pros of the device, and these are the main reasons why you might consider purchasing the Move. And we're going to start off quite simply with the fact that it's a handheld color e-ink note-taking device. That makes it very unique. There are other devices out there that are similar, but nothing that really delivers on the promise of kind of mobile note-taking in the way that the Move does. And it does it excellently. It delivers on that promise. So the basic premise of what the device is one of its core strengths. In addition to that, the reMarkable software is easy to learn, as it is on all reMarkable devices, and that carries forward here as well. That means anyone who's brand new to e-ink note-taking can jump on into the reMarkable and have no issues pretty much just getting started from the jump. So that's one of the excellent qualities of the reMarkable software. The cloud system is excellent. I say what you will about the fact that there's a subscription service attached to that. It has some of the most seamless syncing that I've seen on an e-ink device. So to give you an example of what I mean, let's say that I'm out in the field or I'm out at work, I'm taking notes, and I come home where the device then connects to my Wi-Fi network. All I have to do is, open the cover or press the power button to turn it into an active state. And it's going to sync in a few minutes automatically. If I have it set where the device will go back into a sleep mode automatically, then all I have to do is just open that device and walk away. That's it. And then it will sync to the cloud services in a few minutes. I'll be able to use the app. It can sync to other devices and so on. It's one of the most seamless syncing systems in e-ink, and it's excellent here as well. Finally, the premium hardware. The hardware is solid. It looks great. There's no creaks. It feels great in the hand. Everything about the hardware screams a high quality device. And that's not unusual for reMarkable devices, but that's definitely true here. And because you are holding it so much more, as opposed to, say, just putting it on the table, that really shines. Okay, but what about the cons? What are reasons why you might pass on purchasing the Move? And I think it clearly starts with the price. Yes, the list price is about $450, which in and of itself is fairly expensive, but that can really add up. In my particular example, I ended up purchasing the device. I ended up getting the Marker Plus, and having that eraser at the end of the stylus is really convenient, and I would argue is something you'd want to consider over the regular marker. And then I ended up going with a folio, the leather folio. And when I was done, you add in taxes, you add in shipping, it was over $650 for a 7.3-inch device. That's really expensive. So that's definitely a consideration you have to keep in mind with this device. Do you really want to make that big of an investment? In addition to that, it does have e-reading capability. It can read EPUBs just fine, and it's got fairly, good formatting options for those. PDFs, not so much. Now, if the PDF is designed for the screen, that's a different story. But most PDFs are designed for, 8.5 by 11 or roughly that dimension of paper, depending on your region. And that is where it's kind of a miserable experience reading on this type of device. The screen flashes so much as you're trying to pinch and zoom, and there just aren't enough features to make that a good experience. Now, referring to PDFs, would be a different story. If you were just trying to pull up a PDF, go to a particular page, maybe to see a diagram or what have you, that's okay. But just general reading isn't great. And then there's no apps, so there's no way you can get protected files. So if you bought from for your Kindle or you bought from Kobo, you're not reading any of those books on this device. So it's really meant for note taking. It has reading, is capable of that, again with non-protected EPUBs and to a lesser extent PDFs. But it's just not a great experience. And there's many other devices that do readers better that are only slightly larger than this device. So I think that's a definite con. Again, there's no apps other than what reMarkable provides, and so obviously that hampers this as an e-reader, as we just talked about. But other utilities that you might want to use on an e-ink device just aren't possible here. This is a closed system, so you either kind of buy into reMarkable system or you're kind of out of luck. There are some integrations. You can integrate to some cloud services like Google Drive and OneDrive and Dropbox, I believe, but there's just not the level of apps that you can get on other e-ink devices like books, like Viwoods, and more. So that's a definite limitation. You're really just doing note-taking on this device. The screen size even limits what type of note-taking that you can do. So, I mean, technically you can do whatever you want, but the screen size is more amenable to more briefer notes, to lists, to that type of thing. If you're taking more extensive notes, like say verbatim notes in a classroom or what have you, then this isn't a great screen size for that. So ultimately, if you take all these cons together, while the Move is definitely an excellent e-ink device for note-taking, outside of that, it's fairly limited, and yet you're still paying this premium price point. And so I think those are, in general, the arguments against purchasing the Move. Okay, so now we're going to move into what I call my secondary pros. And these are things I liked about the device, but I don't think they necessarily rise to the level of driving a purchasing decision, but they are things I want to call out as positives. And we'll start off with ghosting management. It's not that there's no ghosting on the device, and for those that don't know, ghosting is basically like an after image. Say you erase something, you might see a little bit of that image in the background. There's some ghosting on this device, but it's fairly well managed. They do a good job of keeping that down to a minimum, and you don't generally think about ghosting as you're just going through using this device day to day. The highlighter colors are amazing, and I'm a sucker for good highlighters. I love creating lists and then using highlighters to mark them off. Yeah, you can use a check mark instead, but using a highlighter is just something I really enjoy. And this is an excellent application with the color of using highlighters on the device, so I really appreciate that. As usual, reMarkable has a large selection of templates to choose from, both on the device, and now the community will start producing their own submitted templates as well, using the reMarkable method service. So, a great selection here that's available to you from the jump, and the ability for that selection to grow over time is excellent. The screen is nice and scratchy, and I'm going to say something that I might be a little bit in the minority on this, but with the reMarkable Paper Pro, their larger device, I found the screen scratchiness to be just a little bit over the top, almost cartoonish in a sense. They really wanted you to hear that scratchy sound, and I still kind of liked it overall, but I just thought it was a little more intense than it needed to be. On the Move, that scratchiness is just a little bit muted. It's still definitely very apparent, but to me it feels more natural. It feels more like a pencil on paper type of a sound, and I really appreciate that on this device. So I thought that was a big pro. The stylus works well. It's not the best stylus that I've ever used, but it's up there. It's among the best. It has a nice thickness to it. The eraser generally works really well. And the magnetic connection to the device is really good. I never felt compelled to use that extra flap you get on the folio because that connection is so solid, it seemed extraneous to me. So really nice touch there. Finally, there's just a nice to have a wide range of pen types that you can choose from. And that's really good if you're particularly into sketching, but even as a note taker, it allows you the flexibility to use the type of pen style you want, and to be able, of course, to switch between them. For example, I go between a fine liner and the highlighter quite often, and to have that selection is really nice. It's not unusual to have a selection of pen styles on devices, but not many devices have 9 pen styles, as is the case with this device. It's usually 5 or 6, so really nice selection here. So we're going to close out now with the secondary cons. And again, I wouldn't necessarily not purchase the Move because of these items, but these are things that are kind of limitations of the device you probably should be aware of, and I did find them in certain cases to be a little bit annoying. We'll start off with the fact there's a limited range of dock formats, and I've said this before and I'll say it again. The Gallery 3 technology screams comics. It would be great to view comics, but there is no ability to read comics on this device unless they're in a PDF format. And even then, there's no technology that allows you to go cell by cell as maybe you could, say, in the Amazon Kindle app. So a lack of document formats is a serious limitation. I believe they only have EPUBs and PDFs. I don't believe there's other formats that you can use on this device unless I'm mistaken. So a very narrow range of the type of documents that you can read on the device. The device isn't always snappy. A lot of times it is, but then there's occasions where you find that you have to maybe tap a couple times for something to happen. For example, going into a pen tray, usually it's really snappy going in, but sometimes I have to get a really strong tap in order to get out of a pen tray. And every once in a while, a menu item will be a touch sluggish. It's not the norm, but it does happen enough that you notice it. There are screen flashes. That's how they manage ghosting to a large degree. And for note-taking, it's pretty occasional. In some cases, in reading, again, where you're doing a lot of pinching and zooming on the document, you're going to see a lot of screen flashes. So that is a definite weakness of the Gallery 3 technology that you have to be aware of. I generally find I get used to it with the note-taking, but I know other people can't stand it at all, so your usage may vary. If you're not sure how you feel about that, I would check out my visual tour video, because there I put the camera right on top of the device, and I go through different features. And in the process of that, you can actually see how the screen behaves. So if you want to see that in action, go to that video to take a look. The color writing behavior is really strange. I covered this in detail in the first video, the unboxing and hardware impressions video. And basically, if you draw a line, unless it's black, it's going to have some odd behavior as you draw it, and then it's going to re-render to pick up its final color. You can get used to that, but it is a little quirky. And again, with Kaleido 3, which is the other competing e-ink technology, you don't have it. So that's definitely a con to call out. And then finally, there is a subscription to get all of their services, particularly their cloud services. And I know this is a big drawback for a lot of people. No other device manufacturer has a subscription service, so I know this rubs people the wrong way. I'll just say for my part, I think it's fairly inexpensive. I think it's ultimately reasonably priced in that it's, I think, $3 a month or maybe like $30 a year or something like that. I might be just a few dollars off. But for me, that's the equivalent of 2 lunches. So I don't really think it's a significant amount of money to spend. And I do like their cloud services. But again, relative to other manufacturers, you get maybe not as good, but still really good cloud services, and there's no subscription for it. So that is definitely a con to consider. So before we go on to the analysis of the review, I did want to mention the fact that I was suspiciously silent about talking about handwriting search. And I should at least say something about that, because that is a feature that reMarkable released in their software in conjunction with the release of the Move. One of the reasons why I didn't talk about that is that my handwriting in particular is fairly variable, and I really don't have an objective way of being able to measure, say, how Books' handwriting search is better than Supernotes or better than reMarkable's. I don't have a way really to measure that. And so I basically kind of back off on talking about that because I don't have a good way of basically judging these things. I will say that in my limited experience with handwriting search, which appears to be limited in just searching within a notebook here on the reMarkable, so I don't think you can search on handwriting across notebooks, I haven't been that impressed. I've had mixed ability in order for the service to work. So I did encounter some issues there, but your mileage might vary. It could be a product of my handwriting or what have you. So I didn't really want to list it as either a pro or a con because I didn't feel confident that I would know, how good that experience would be for other viewers. I will say this though, in general, handwriting search is a feature that's been around for a number of years. Other manufacturers have had it, like reMarkable and Books. And I actually think that it's kind of an overrated feature. I used to use handwriting search a lot when I first got my Books device, but other more specific search and reference functions like tags or like the star marking system with Supernote, keyword, and so on are much more reliable ways of being able to refer to your notes than trying to search for notes via handwriting. Because again, handwriting can be very variable. Sometimes it will find your word, sometimes it won't. If you have nicer handwriting, then you might make more use of that type of functionality. But in my personal experience, I don't find myself using handwriting search all that much. And that's another reason why I generally don't talk about it in my reviews. Now, before we go any further into my analysis, I think it's important for me to kind of frame what I think the reMarkable move is good and not good for. And we've kind of hinted at that a little bit earlier, particularly with the battery results. But I see the move as being great with, for lack of a better phrase, mobile type of note-taking. So I'll give you kind of 3 examples of what I mean by that. First off, a great way to kind of keep score on games. I play games like cribbage or Lost Cities or anything that requires you to keep score on paper. This is a really nice device to do that. I used to actually do it on larger 10-inch devices, and that's always a little bit clunky, with the game. So having a smaller form factor is actually quite nice for that purpose. Taking notes in the field. I walked around for a few days with this device and used it in my job, and carrying it with me as I left my office I thought was a great experience. You do need to hold it in your hand. I've seen an image where someone put it in their pocket. That's ridiculous. It would tear my dress pockets apart. But holding it in my hand wasn't a problem at all. It's definitely light, easy to hold. You almost forget it's there. And then if I have to jot a note down, I can open it up and write it in quickly. So it was great for that purpose as well. The third thing I'll show is for, things for like lists and agendas. It's just perfect for that. It's a nice tight screen. I mentioned how I used it for kind of doing my daily agenda. If I wanted to make a checklist of a project I was working on, that would be great. You could use it for a shopping list even. All those features work really well, where it gives you note-taking ability without the clunkiness of having to carry around a larger device. There really aren't, in my opinion, any good e-ink note-taking competitors to this device because of their size. You could argue that this is really competing mostly with phones. So people that might be taking notes on the phones, this is an alternative to that. And I actually think that the move is better than a phone. I've never been a fan of taking notes on phones. I like the idea of drawing or writing with a stylus. I think it's much better than typing on a keyboard. That's just my personal opinion. But I do think ultimately the main competitor isn't other e-ink devices, at least at this time, but it is taking notes on the phone. So just something to think about in your particular situation. What I don't think the move is good for is longer form note-taking. So if I'm taking notes in a meeting, for example, and I'm jotting a lot of notes down, it's helpful to have a larger screen size to be able to see a lot of those notes at once. Yeah, you're still probably taking notes on multiple pages, but that's better than having a lot more pages. It's better to have 3 pages of notes than, say, 11, which might be required if you're doing it on a 7-inch device versus a 10-inch device, as an example. I think creative writing, similar theme. It's just great to see your writing out there in front of you as opposed to having it on multiple pages. And I think bigger devices are more amenable to that. If you're doing any type of research or whatever, again, really the same themes are running through these reasons why larger devices are better, and that having much more space to write out more complicated things is a benefit for larger devices, and I wouldn't use the move for those type of activities. So that's kind of how I see and how I'm thinking about the move rather, as I'm reviewing the device. I'm thinking of it for those activities, like scoring games, like making lists, like taking notes in the field, that I think it's really designed for. So that's kind of how my analysis will be based going forward. So let's talk a little bit about how the move fits into the larger reMarkable ecosystem. And I think the best example that I can come up with is using a reMarkable Paper Pro, where you've got this really large screen size. I think it was 11.8 inches on that screen, and leaving that, on your desk or in an office, and then using the move as a supplement to that to take notes as you leave the office. So you don't have to carry this really large device around. You can take the move around instead. And as I just noted, the move specializes itself in certain types of note-taking and makes it more convenient than doing those activities on this larger reMarkable Paper Pro screen. But what the Move does allow you to do is it really does complement this much larger reMarkable Paper Pro screen, because you don't have to worry as much about carrying it around or using it in places where the size of the larger device would be awkward. So to me, that's the balance. And having the Connect service between the two allows you to easily share notes and documents between the two, is a really nice fit. I think it's telling that the Move gets a lot of its naming convention and its physical design from the reMarkable Paper Pro, because I think subtly, reMarkable is basically offering two choices. One is this combination of the Move and the Paper Pro in kind of the ways I just described, but the other is the reMarkable 2 for someone that doesn't want two devices. They want kind of the jack of all trades, and that is kind of what the 10-inch device space is. It's a nice medium between these two more specialized functions. So I think it's not an accident that, you know, there's so much similarity between the Move and the large reMarkable Paper Pro. And in fact, in the future, if there was to be a reMarkable 3, my guess is its design language would not match that of the Move and the Paper Pro. I think it was an intentional move on reMarkable to say, here is the Move, a companion to our much larger device, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, before I get to my final recommendation, I do want to talk about this concept of fear of missing out, or FOMO, because I think this is very relevant here. You know, when the reMarkable device was announced, within 1 to 2 days, various YouTube and media outlets had all their videos out about the device, you know, their unboxing, their reviews, and what have you. And while I'm not going to comment on any individual channel or creator or tech site, I am going to comment on the fact that it's important to understand that in aggregate, this was an ad campaign created by reMarkable. Now, I'm not saying anything negative about reMarkable, nor the channels for participating in that, but I'm just making the observation that this was a very slick marketing move on reMarkable's part to make sure that there was just this wall of positive information coming out about the Move. It's really designed to create hype and to create this sense of, you've got to get this device, right? So again, nothing wrong with that. reMarkable is acting like a good marketing company, a good business, and the channels are also doing their own thing for business reasons. So no issues with it. But the only thing I'm saying this for is to make sure that as the buyer, you don't get caught up in the hype, that you have the ability to kind of separate away from that and to be able to assess whether this device really is for you or not. I'll just give one example without going into details. There's one tech site that gave the reMarkable Move 5 stars out of 5. And I like the reMarkable Move. Again, we're going to get into the recommendation in a second, but it's not a 5-star device. I think that's a great example of what I mean in terms of this marketing campaign. So, a couple tips that I want to share with you that I think can help preventing purchasing the device that you may not end up wanting. And I should note, there is a 100-day return policy with reMarkable. As far as I know, I think that works fairly well. I haven't experienced the return policy myself, but people seem to have indicated on like Reddit that the process works fairly well. So I'll just trust those testimonials. So the risk isn't huge. It's not like you're going to end up with the device and you can't get rid of it, but it's still a hassle. And so go through these exercises if you're thinking about buying the Move and you want to make sure you're not being influenced by this kind of wall of hype. So the first exercise is simply to think about the things that you would use this smaller device for. What are things that you think you can get utility for, and write those down. You don't need to write an extensive list. Just write down, you know, the 3 to 5 major things that you might be using the device for. And then right next to that, how often do you think you would actually do those activities? The last piece I would recommend is to write the price on that same piece of paper or on that e-ink device, and just step back and take a look at that. I think you'll find that will help kind of be a little bit sobering in terms of understanding where the actual utility of the device might be for you. So that's one exercise I recommend. Another exercise is to then look at that same list, maybe only take the top 1 or 2 items, and ask yourself the following question. were these things that mattered to me before I heard about the reMarkable move? In other words, was there something I was reflecting on or some annoyance that I had with my existing setup where these things were kind of either on top of my mind or maybe even in the back of your mind previously? If the answer to those questions is yes, then there probably is a higher likelihood that there's a legitimate need that the reMarkable move can meet. But if the answer to that is no, that might be a red flag to say, well, actually, maybe this isn't the right device for me. So I just wanted to throw that out there because there's just been such a great marketing campaign. You really have to tip your hat at reMarkable for that. But you also have to pause and say, wait, is this really a good device? Is this really something that I can ultimately use? And I hope that these exercises are helpful in thinking that through. Okay, so having said all of that, what is my final recommendation? Well, actually, you know what? I am going to recommend the move. Now, price is definitely a concern. And, an interesting point to make here is that there have been devices that I've reviewed in the past where I've liked them, generally speaking, but I've said, but because of the price, I can't recommend that. So why would it be different with this device? And I think the reason why is in the past, when I have this situation where I like a device, but I think it's selling at too much of a price point, there's another device available that you can purchase that can do the same functionality, maybe even better, at a lower price point. And that's why the recommendation isn't ultimately given. I don't think that's the case here. I don't think there's a legitimate alternative to turn to. I think the reMarkable move fills a very unique spot in the marketplace and it does it really well. And as a result of that, I can recommend it despite the price point. Everyone's going to have their own opinion on whether it's worth purchasing the move or not. That will vary. But what I will say is if you do have a use case where you can make use of the form factor, I think the move delivers on that promise. I thought I would close just by sharing what my own thoughts are about using the device. I review a lot of e-ink devices, and most of them I don't end up using on a day-to-day basis. So will I be using the reMarkable move? And as of this viewing, I'm not sure. It's possible I'll use it at the workplace. I did enjoy using it in the field, and that would allow me to use an even larger device that I can keep at my desk. So that's the kind of benefit I'm thinking of there. I could use it at home, again, for scoring games. That's perfect. I just haven't decided yet, so I'm going to have to take more time and think about it. It's definitely something I'm considering, so I might end up using the device. It is possible I might not, though. It is possible that at the end I'll decide that specialization of note-taking isn't worth it, that I just want to charge one device. I don't know. It's an intriguing decision that I'll have to make, and I'll make that over time. But I really do like the device. I'm really glad I reviewed it. And I'm definitely considering it. Whether I'll use it in the end, well, I guess time will tell. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. I hope you enjoyed the review and found it helpful as well. If you have any questions, pop those in the chat and I'll try to answer them the best I can. And until then, I'll see you in the next video.